What's up, Lego builders? Welcome back to Coconut Brick Studios. Lego and Transformers, the peanut butter and jelly sandwich of the toy world.
Nothing like a peanut butter and jellyfish jelly sandwich to help you get to sleep.
A couple of weeks ago, I put out a video where I built 3 Lego Star Wars sets and 1 mock, and what they might look like if they could turn into Transformers. And now it's time for a sequel to that video, because we all know how well those work. But this time around, instead of doing vehicles from the Clone Wars, I am picking 4 sets from the original trilogy and building what they might look like if they were Transformers. As you guys know, I am no pro when it comes to building robots, so if nothing else, this video may just be a good example of what not to do. All right, almost got it. I know you're all ready to get to the building, so execute Order 66 on that like button and let's get started. I'm going to start with the Rebellion side of things, and what better choice than one of the most iconic ships in all of Star Wars, the X-Wing Starfighter. One thing I'd like to note is that none of these are actually going to transform. I'm not that skilled of a builder yet, so these are just a representation of what the Transformers could look like in robot form. I didn't know where to start with this build, but my buddy Slipstream from Instagram hooked me up with a hip/lower torso build that he got from someone else, so I'm going to start there. But it's going to be a much bigger version of that because I want this to be a decent sized robot. I learned that I like to start with the feet and legs first because it's easier to envision and build the torso and the rest of the build in a way that looks good compared to the legs. And in my opinion, the legs are the most important part because they hold up and support the rest of the build. And nobody wants to build a robot who looks like it skips leg day.
Easy there, Grandpa. Okay, I don't need your help, okay?
This was the first Transformer I ever built, even before the ones in the prequel video. What happened was I built all the Transformers, then realized I couldn't include all of them in one video without it being super long, so I decided to split it into 2 parts, and the last 2 Transformers ended up going in the video that came out first. As a result, this one will look very different from the others, as I learned very quickly what did and didn't work when it comes to building Lego robots. Namely, that small ball joints are a really bad option for limbs. I thought the smaller size would make it easier to hide and work around them, and that is true, but they weren't able to hold the weight of the robot very well, and so I was very limited with what poses I could do. And not gonna lie, I was ready to smash this build by the end of the video because of how many times he would fall over and break. Since the X-Wing is mostly white, that's what I'm going to do with this Transformer. I'm also adding in some dark red highlights since we see red markings on the actual ship. Now it's time to assemble the legs. You can see how easy those joints move around even without the weight of the rest of the build on it, which is not a good sign. But for how weak they are, I like how they turned out. Very thick looking, especially those big moon boots. Get ready to see some of the stiffest and finickiest arms I have built in a long time. I tried using hinge plates instead of ball joint sockets to try a new joint technique, and the hinges are a lot weaker than even the small ball joints, but that doesn't really matter for the arms because they only need to hold up themselves in a small weapon. But the shoulders are where I really messed up. I decided to just use a regular stud and plate connection on top of a hinge brick, and the result is a mobility nightmare. Now that I have sufficiently roasted my robot building skills, there is one cool feature I want to talk about with these arms. They're the only ones with articulating fingers on the hands. I used bar plates and wrenches for the fingers, and while it was a cool idea, I felt like it didn't work very well with the overall build from a practical standpoint because the wrenches got in the way and made it hard for the hands to hold anything. I built the torso in chunks already because I knew it would take forever to try and design one on camera, but the back and front sections are connected to each other by a bracket and headlight brick facing opposite directions. The X-Wing Transformer, light, mobile, and ready for anything. He's a good representation of what the actual fighter brings to the table. The most recognizable features that tie this build to the X-Wing are the wings and engines on the back, which I modeled as closely as I could to the wings on the actual X-Wing. Because it's the only Transformer that can fly, I didn't want him to be too overpowered, so I only gave him 1 blaster rifle, but I did add a small shoulder-mounted grenade launcher, which will help him against his next opponent who is very defense-oriented. Once I decided to do an X-Wing Transformer, I knew his opponent would have to be the TIE Fighter. It's one of the most classic matchups in Star Wars, and I picked the one in particular from the solo wave of Lego Star Wars sets to base my build off of. After the structural nightmare that was the last build, I decided to try using bigger, more stiff ball joints, which worked much better. This was the build where I discovered a lot of the building techniques you saw in the other video, like the big ball joints and half pegs on the underside of bricks connected to slopes. The TIE Fighter I'm going off of is mostly gray with light bluish gray and black highlights, so that is the same color palette I'm going to be using with this Transformer. For some weird reason, this build reminds me of an orc or mystical beast of some kind. Maybe it's because it looks like there are big teeth right under the eyes. Or another reason could be the feet. They're pretty beefy and I used cheese slopes on the front to make them look kind of hooved. Now it's time for the the legs to be assembled. These are some of the most complete legs I've built front to back because by the time I got to the prequel Transformers, I was running out of the good detail pieces, especially the inverted slopes. The legs connect to a small hip piece which connects to the body via a single stud connection. You would think I would have learned from the previous build that that is a big no-no. I tried to make the torso look as human as I could using lots of slopes and plates to create a roundish base that was wider at the top than at the bottom so it wouldn't look like a big tube. This is such a good way to build bodies. You just build two halves that can be as detailed as you want because the undersides or the back sides of all the brick will just connect to each other and you'll have studs to build with on the front and back of your build. I also gave this guy some big lats so he can haul around his weapons with ease. Fitting the ball joints into the shoulders was a little tricky. I had to add rows of plate on each half of the torso until when hooked together they created a gap large enough for the ball joint piece to fit into. Once that was done, I used half pegs slid into the ball joint bricks with another half peg at the bottom of the torso to connect the two halves. Unfortunately, this guy had the worst hands of all of the Transformers. I didn't even give him clenched fingers like some of the later builds, so it looks like I just sent him into combat wearing mittens. This Transformer still needs more features, so I'm going to make a big shield based off of one of the wings. An easy choice considering the TIE Fighter basically looks like a ship with two giant shields on either side. Since he has that big old shield, I'm only going to arm him with a single pistol. Writing this script has been brutal because I don't want to just recount what you're already seeing, and after building and talking about 4 of these builds, all of which have a pretty similar composition, I'm running out of good stuff to say. I thought about giving this one a sword to match the shield, but I didn't want him to be the only one to bring a sword to a gunfight. As Transformer number 2, he turned out much better and has a lot more posing potential than the first one. I also added a little design on his chest so he could feel special. Last and probably least, I have to do 2 Minicon builds. This was a lot harder to do for the Imperial era as there aren't as many small builds to choose from. For the Imperial Minicon, I picked a classic speeder with reddish brown like what we see on Endor. I took the Separatist Minicon body from the last video and modified it with brown cheese slopes and added dual blasters, one on each arm. The end result ended up looking like a mix between Mr. Thomas from the Chronicles of Narnia and Bigfoot. The Rebel one was really tough because they have no really small ships or vehicles that match up with the Imperial speeder. I ended up going with one of the worst battle pack builds I've ever seen, this Santa's Sleigh meets Ancient Chariot Nightmare, which came out in the 2010 Rebel battle pack. It looks to be significantly beefier than the Imperial speeder, so the Transformer will be the larger of the two and have 2 large shields attached to his hands. Since the build he's based off looks pretty big and blocky. I also added some blasters on the wrists. At last, here's the final showdown. I feel like these guys are pretty evenly matched. If the X-Wing Transformer takes to the air, he has the advantage of the high ground. But in close quarter combat, the TIE Fighter Transformer will be tough to beat with that large shield, which can be used as a defensive or offensive weapon. Of the 2 builds, I definitely prefer the TIE Fighter. X-Wing guy was a guinea pig, so he has all the bad techniques and features I learned not to reuse. But neither of these guys could take on the prequel Transformers. Kind of like how the actual trilogies compare to each other. I'm kidding, of course. I enjoy both trilogies, and I think both are great for different reasons. Of the 2 Minicons, it's not even close. The Rebel one is bigger and has more at his disposal with the shields and guns, but maybe the speed and mobility of the Imperial speeder will give him the necessary edge to win the fight. Well, this will be the last Transformer video I do for a while. While a good break from what I normally do, they're very time-consuming videos to make, and after building all these Transformers, I'm ready to be done with robot builds. Plus, if I have to deal with one more finicky Transformer, I'm going to lose my mind. But it was a great learning experience, and now I have lots of techniques and tools for the next time I attempt some robots. Don't forget to let me know which of these Transformers was your favorite and why in the comments, and I will catch you next time, but until then, happy building.